He walked through the crowded streets, invisible to most people. He had grown used to it over the years. People passed by, focused on their own lives, rarely noticing him. Sometimes he tried to join conversations, but his voice seemed to vanish in the background. He had learned that it was easier to stay quiet and let the world go on without him. He lived in a small apartment filled with the sounds of life outside his window, the chatter of neighbors, the distant horns of cars, and the occasional bark of a dog. Inside, there was a different kind of sound, the soft, soothing notes of a piano. It was old and slightly worn, but to him it was perfect. Every evening, after finishing his daily chores, he would sit down at the piano and let his fingers find their way across the keys. The music felt alive in his hands, almost as if it understood the emotions he could never express with words. No one around him seemed to notice his talent. His co-workers barely acknowledged him at the office, often walking past without a greeting. At the small cafe where he sometimes played quietly on an upright piano, customers rarely stayed long enough to hear the full pieces. They came for coffee and conversation, not for the music that flowed from his fingertips. Even family gatherings were filled with voices that drowned out any hope of someone stopping to listen. Yet he played on, finding solace in the melodies he created. He had always loved music. From a young age, he remembered sneaking into the living room to touch the piano keys, feeling a thrill with every note he struck. His parents had supported him in small ways, buying him sheet music and encouraging practice. But life had its own demands, and as he grew older, attention faded. Friends drifted away, more interested in social events than in quiet afternoons spent with music. Still, he practiced, believing that one day, the music itself would speak for him. On most days, he would play alone for hours. Sometimes, he would close his eyes and imagine an audience, a crowd moved by the notes he produced. In his mind, people leaned forward, captivated by the emotions in every chord and every gentle trill. He imagined them feeling the sadness of a slow, melancholic piece, and the joy of a lively, rhythmic composition. Though these audiences existed only in his imagination, they kept him motivated, giving purpose to his quiet, lonely practice sessions. Neighbors occasionally commented on the soft music floating through the thin walls of the apartment. Some remarked on how pleasant it was, but their compliments were fleeting, never more than a passing remark before they returned to their own routines. He longed for someone to linger, to listen deeply, to understand the language of his music. But day after day, the world seemed too busy, too distracted, to notice what was happening in his small corner of life. He began to notice a pattern. People only seemed to recognize talent when it was flashy, loud, or widely praised. Quiet dedication went unnoticed, and subtle brilliance often went unappreciated. That realization could have been discouraging, yet he chose to let it inspire him. He knew that the piano was not just an instrument. It was a friend, a companion that never judged or ignored him. No matter how small the audience, the music mattered, and it mattered to him. Every piece he learned had a story. Some were old classics, filled with the weight of history and emotion. Others were modern compositions, playful and inventive. Each piece offered a new challenge, a new way to express what he felt inside. Sometimes he would mix pieces together, improvising, creating something that no one else had ever heard before. In those moments, he felt completely alive, lost in the flow of sound and feeling. His evenings became sacred. After finishing the day's tasks, he would make a cup of tea, sit at the piano, and allow the world to fade. The notes carried him away from loneliness and into a space where he felt seen, even if no one else could see him. Time seemed to stretch, hours passing unnoticed as he explored new melodies and perfected old ones. It was his own private concert, and he was both the performer and the audience. Occasionally, he considered sharing his talent with others more openly. Perhaps a small recital at a local community center or a video recording for social media. But doubt always crept in. Would anyone care? Would anyone notice? Or would he simply become another background figure? His music ignored once more? Despite the fear, the thought lingered, planting a tiny seed of hope in his heart. One afternoon, as he practiced a particularly difficult piece, a neighbor stopped by unexpectedly. She leaned against the door frame, listening quietly. He didn't see her at first, too absorbed in the movement of his hands and the flow of the music. When he finally looked up, she smiled warmly. "That was beautiful," she said simply. The words were short, but they struck him deeply. For a moment, he realized that someone had noticed, that someone had heard him. It was a small gesture, but it filled him with a quiet joy, reinforcing his belief that the music mattered, that the effort he put into each note was not in vain. From that day, he carried a subtle change in himself. He still walked through the crowded streets, still often invisible to the world, but the music inside him felt stronger, more urgent. The possibility that someone might finally pay attention gave him a quiet determination. He began imagining more vividly, not just in his mind, but perhaps in reality, a moment when his music would reach beyond the walls of his apartment, beyond the passing glances and distracted faces. He started to plan small ways to share his music. Perhaps a local open mic night or a casual performance at a nearby cafe. He imagined the nervousness he would feel, standing in front of others, but also the exhilaration of being truly seen for something he loved. Every time he thought of it, his fingers itched for the piano keys, ready to bring the vision to life. The nights continued with practice, the music flowing more passionately than ever. Each note was a statement, a message to the world that he was there, that his talent existed, and that it deserved attention. Even when the room was empty, even when the streets outside were busy with people who barely noticed him, he played with conviction and heart. Slowly, he began to understand that being ignored by the world was not a reflection of his worth. The piano taught him patience, dedication, and the quiet strength of pursuing something meaningful despite the absence of recognition. Every chord struck, every melody played, was a step forward, a proof that he could create beauty that mattered, even if only to himself for the time being. And so, the invisible musician continued, day after day, night after night, letting the music guide him. Each practice session, each piece learned, each note played was a story, a whisper of hope, and a reminder that one day, someone would stop and listen. Until that moment, he played on, carrying the weight of solitude and the light of passion intertwined, knowing that every silent evening spent with the piano was shaping a story that would one day be heard by the world. Days passed in the same quiet rhythm. He would wake up early, tend to small chores, and then lose himself in the music that filled his apartment. Despite the comforting routine, there were moments when doubt crept in, lingering at the edges of his mind like a shadow. He wondered if all his efforts were in vain. Maybe people would never notice him, maybe his talent would stay hidden forever. Sometimes, he would stare at the piano keys and question if it was worth the endless hours of practice. Life outside his apartment was noisy, chaotic, and often indifferent. On the streets, people rushed past, absorbed in their own struggles and ambitions. He noticed the way they rarely made eye contact, the way they seemed to move through the world with invisible walls around them. He longed to be seen, not just as another passerby, but as someone who had something valuable to offer. He wanted the world to pause for a moment and listen, even if it was only for a few notes. In the quiet moments between practice, he would remember times when he had tried to share his music. Small attempts at community gatherings or casual performances often ended in disappointment. Some people had smiled politely, others had walked away without a glance, and a few had dismissed him entirely. Those experiences could have crushed his spirit, but he held on to the belief that every note mattered, even if no one else seemed to care. He began to understand that the world did not always reward quiet talent immediately. Recognition often came to those who were loud, who sought attention, or who were in the right place at the right time. But he had neither the desire to be loud nor the luck of circumstances. What he did have was dedication and passion. Every day he played, he improved, pushing himself to learn pieces that were increasingly difficult, each one a challenge to his skill and his patience. Sometimes he would record himself playing. Listening to the recordings, he could hear the progress he had made over months and years. The music was alive, flowing naturally from his fingertips, filled with emotion that he could not express in words. These recordings were private, for no one to hear, but they were proof to himself that his efforts were not wasted. They reminded him that even without an audience, his music had value, that the dedication and love he poured into each piece were meaningful. There were moments when loneliness pressed heavily upon him. Even with music as his companion, he longed for human connection, for someone who could appreciate not just the sound of the piano, but the emotions behind it. He imagined conversations with listeners, their eyes lighting up as the notes filled the room, the subtle smiles that would show understanding. It was a distant dream, yet one that he held onto fiercely, letting it guide his practice and his hope. He began to notice subtle signs of encouragement in his life. A neighbor would sometimes pause to listen, even if just for a few moments. A colleague at work commented once on how calm he seemed, perhaps sensing the dedication that lay behind his quiet demeanor. These small acknowledgments, fleeting as they were, provided him with encouragement. They became reminders that not all effort went unnoticed, even if recognition was slow to arrive. Despite doubts and challenges, he remained committed to his music. Each evening, after the day's responsibilities were done, he would sit at the piano and let his emotions flow through the keys. He played slow, melancholic pieces that reflected moments of sadness and longing. He played lively, rhythmic compositions that expressed hope and joy. Through music, he explored emotions he could not articulate with words, finding solace and expression that the outside world often denied him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow into his apartment, he attempted a new composition he had been working on for weeks. The piece was complex, demanding both precision and emotion. His fingers danced across the keys, and as he played, he felt a deep connection with the music. The melodies seemed to take on a life of their own, filling the room with vibrations that echoed far beyond the small space. In that moment, he felt a sense of accomplishment and belonging that he rarely experienced in his interactions with the outside world. But as night fell and the music faded, the familiar silence returned. The quiet was heavy, a reminder that the world outside was still unaware of his talent. He struggled with frustration and longing, wishing there was a way to bridge the gap between his music and the people who had yet to hear it. The desire to be acknowledged, to share his gift, became a quiet ache in his chest, a longing that grew stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, a flyer appeared in his mailbox announcing a local community event that would feature performances from residents. It was small, intimate, and open to anyone willing to share their talent. He studied the flyer carefully, his heart racing at the possibility. This could be the opportunity he had been waiting for, a chance to let the world hear what he had been expressing in private for so long. But alongside excitement, fear crept in. What if no one came? What if people still ignored him? What if his performance fell flat? He wrestled with these thoughts for days, pacing the apartment and imagining the scene over and over. He pictured himself on stage, the piano in front of him, the audience waiting. He envisioned the music flowing from his hands, the emotions resonating with the listeners. He imagined the applause, the smiles, the understanding. But the fear of failure and disappointment loomed large, threatening to hold him back. The choice was clear. Stay hidden, continue in solitude, or take a step into the unknown and share his music with others. Eventually, determination won over fear. He realized that even if only a few people noticed, even if only one person truly listened, it would be worth it. The thought of sharing his music, of finally connecting with someone through the notes he had so carefully nurtured, was too powerful to ignore. He began to prepare, selecting pieces that showcased both technical skill and deep emotion, practicing tirelessly to ensure that every note would reflect his dedication. The days leading up to the event were filled with both excitement and anxiety. He practiced from morning until night, refining each piece, exploring nuances, and imagining the impact the music could have. He rehearsed in front of the mirror, in front of the walls of his apartment, and even in his mind before sleeping, visualizing the performance and feeling the emotions it could evoke. Each session strengthened his confidence, even as doubt lingered like a shadow. He also thought about the people who might hear him, The strangers in the crowd, perhaps hurried or distracted, might not immediately recognize the beauty of the music. But he hoped that even a fleeting moment of attention, a pause to truly listen, could be enough to plant a seed of understanding and appreciation. He imagined someone being moved to tears, someone finding comfort or joy in the melodies he played, and that vision carried him forward. As the day of the event approached, he felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The piano, once a private companion, would now be a bridge to the outside world. The chance to finally step out of the shadows and let his talent be seen was both thrilling and terrifying. Yet, beneath the anxiety, a quiet certainty grew. No matter the outcome, he had prepared, he had practiced, and he had poured his heart into every note. For the first time, he felt ready to face an audience and let the music speak for him. And so, he continued practicing, each day a step closer to the moment that could change everything. The quiet apartment, once a sanctuary of solitude, became a rehearsal space filled with hope and determination. With every chord, every melody, he built the courage to step forward, to share his gift, and to finally be seen. Not just for the music, but for the passion, dedication, and heart that had always been a part of him. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt that recognition might not be as distant as it once seemed. He was ready, and the world, whether it knew it or not, would soon have to listen. The day of the community event arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nerves that made his stomach twist. He woke early, carefully choosing his outfit, something simple but respectable. He wanted to appear confident, even if inside he was anything but. The piano, once his private sanctuary, would now be exposed to an audience that had no idea who he was. The thought of strangers judging every note sent a shiver through him, but he reminded himself of all the hours he had practiced, all the nights he had poured his heart into the music. The journey to the venue felt long, every step heavy with anxiety. He noticed the people around him, laughing, chatting, and walking with ease. Each passing face seemed to emphasize his own nervousness. He tried to remind himself that they were just humans like him, and that his music could speak louder than his fear. Still, the familiar sensation of being overlooked lingered, like a shadow he could not shake. When he entered the small hall, he was struck by its simplicity. Folding chairs lined the room, and a small stage held a modest piano. A few people milled about, setting up microphones, arranging programs, and making last-minute adjustments. The event felt intimate, but it also made him acutely aware that everyone there would be watching him. He took a deep breath, feeling the tension in his shoulders, and focused on the music inside him. As he warmed up, fingers moving across the keys in gentle scales, he observed other performers. Some sang, others played instruments, and a few recited poetry. Each act drew small applause, polite and encouraging. Watching them, he felt a pang of doubt, wondering if he could match their presence, their ability to hold the audience's attention. Yet, he reminded himself that his strength lay not in showmanship but in sincerity, in the emotion he could pour into every note. Minutes before his turn, he sat backstage, closing his eyes and imagining the performance. He visualized the room filled with people leaning forward, their eyes focused on the piano, their hearts connected to the music. He pictured himself moving through each piece with precision and feeling, allowing the melodies to flow naturally. His hands trembled slightly as he recalled the countless hours of practice, but the vision of sharing his music gave him courage. When the host called his name, he walked to the stage slowly, each step measured, feeling the soft thud of his shoes against the wooden floor. He sat on the piano bench, taking a moment to settle himself. The room fell quiet, and all eyes turned toward him. He took a deep breath, letting the silence wash over him, and placed his fingers on the keys. Then he began to play. The first notes were tentative, careful, as if testing the waters of the audience's attention. But as the music progressed, his confidence grew. He let himself feel each emotion, the longing, the hope, the joy, and the sorrow, and allowed it to flow through the piano. The room, once filled with murmurs and shifting bodies, became still. People stopped what they were doing, captivated by the sound that seemed to carry more than just notes. It carried a story, his story. He played a piece that told of quiet struggle, of days spent unnoticed and unappreciated. The soft, melancholic melody resonated with the audience, many of whom felt the honesty behind every note. Some leaned forward, their faces showing concentration and empathy, while others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. He could sense the shift, the attention moving from polite observation to genuine engagement. Midway through his performance, he transitioned into a brighter, lively composition, reflecting hope and resilience. The notes danced and flowed, and he watched as the audience responded subtly, smiles appearing, fingers tapping along, some nodding in rhythm. It was the first time he truly felt the connection he had imagined for so long. The piano, once a private companion, had become a bridge to the hearts of others. He allowed himself to fully immerse in the moment, forgetting the nervousness, the doubts, and even the passing of time. The music was all that mattered, each note a conversation with the audience. He felt the energy in the room, the unspoken acknowledgement that he was no longer invisible. For the first time, his talent was not hidden in the shadows but illuminated in front of real people, people who were listening. As the final chords resonated and faded into silence, he lifted his hands from the keys, feeling a tremor of both exhaustion and exhilaration. The room remained quiet for a heartbeat, then erupted into applause. It was not just polite clapping. It was heartfelt, genuine, and sustained. People were on their feet, cheering, some with expressions of awe and surprise. He blinked, unable to believe what was happening. The music he had nurtured alone for so long had finally broken through, touching hearts he had only dreamed could feel it. After the performance, several people came up to him, offering congratulations, asking questions about the pieces, and expressing admiration. Their words were warm and sincere, not just a fleeting acknowledgement but a recognition of the talent and dedication that had gone into the performance. Each interaction left him feeling lighter, as if a weight he had carried for years was finally lifting. He also noticed a few children in the audience, eyes wide with fascination, asking their parents if they could learn to play like him. That simple curiosity and admiration stirred something deep within him, a reminder of why he had started playing in the first place. The music was not just for him. It had the power to inspire, to connect, and to change how people felt, even if only for a few moments. Backstage, he replayed the performance in his mind, savoring each note and the response it had received. The fear that had gripped him before stepping on stage seemed distant, almost irrelevant. He realized that the courage to share, the willingness to be vulnerable, had been just as important as the music itself. The experience had shown him that recognition often comes when one dares to step forward, even when the world seems indifferent. The event continued, but he felt a quiet pride that would stay with him long after the applause faded. He mingled briefly with the other performers, sharing smiles and encouraging words. Unlike before, when he often felt like an outsider, he now felt a part of the community, his music having created a space for connection and understanding. On the way home, he walked slowly, replaying the applause and the faces of those who had listened intently. The city felt different somehow, less overwhelming and more welcoming. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, acknowledged not for words or appearances, but for the talent and heart he had poured into his music. It was a revelation that fueled his desire to continue, to practice even harder, and to share more of himself with the world. That night, he returned to his apartment, sitting at the piano once more, not to practice, but to reflect. The keys felt familiar yet transformed, carrying the memory of the day and the connection he had forged with the audience. He played softly, not for an imagined audience, but for himself, reliving the emotions and the triumph of having his music heard. Each note was infused with gratitude, joy, and a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that this experience marked a turning point. The invisible days of solitary practice had led him here, to a moment where his dedication, patience, and passion had finally been recognized. It was not the end of his journey, but a beginning, a first step toward sharing his music more openly and fearlessly. The quiet musician, once unnoticed, had taken a courageous leap, and the world had listened. And as the final notes faded into the night, he knew that the path ahead, though still uncertain, was filled with possibility, hope, and the promise of more moments where his music could touch hearts. The applause still echoed in his ears as he stepped down from the small stage. The warmth of the clapping hands and the smiles of the audience were unlike anything he had ever experienced. He felt light, almost as if he were floating, carrying a mixture of relief and exhilaration. After so many years of practicing alone, being finally recognized felt surreal. The nervousness and doubt that had clung to him for so long melted away, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from being seen for what he truly was. People approached him, one after another, offering congratulations, compliments, and genuine admiration. Some were elderly community members who remembered the struggles of their own youth and could recognize dedication when they saw it. Others were younger, eyes wide with excitement and curiosity, asking questions about his technique, the pieces he played, and how long he had been practicing. The questions, sincere and thoughtful, touched him deeply, for they indicated not only attention but understanding and appreciation. A teacher from a nearby school came forward, her eyes shining with interest. She spoke about organizing music workshops for local students and suggested he could share his skills with them. The idea seemed overwhelming at first, but it also carried an unexpected thrill. He imagined guiding young musicians, helping them discover the joy and power of music, and in that moment, he realized how much he had to offer beyond just performance. The event organizer, a cheerful woman with a kind voice, approached him as well. She praised not only his talent but the emotional depth of his performance. She mentioned how the entire audience had been captivated, hanging on every note, and how rare it was for someone to create such a profound connection in a single performance. The words sank in slowly, filling him with a mixture of pride and humility. He had spent years honing his skills in solitude, never imagining that his music could move people so deeply. Even the other performers came up to shake his hand, exchanging smiles and compliments. Some admitted they had underestimated him, having seen him quietly in the corners before, and were now impressed by the strength and beauty of his playing. The acknowledgement from peers who had once seemed distant added a new layer of validation, reinforcing that he belonged among those who shared a love for music and performance. After the event, he walked through the streets with a new perspective. The city felt less cold, less indifferent. He noticed faces that once seemed like strangers and imagined them remembering his music, even if only subconsciously. He carried with him the memory of attentive eyes, appreciative nods, and the genuine joy reflected in people's expressions. It was a world he had longed to enter, and now, for the first time, it seemed accessible. That night, he returned to his apartment, not to practice, but to reflect. He sat at the piano and played softly, reliving the emotions of the performance. Each note brought back the intensity of the moment, the connection with the audience, and the realization that his music had meaning beyond the walls of his room. For the first time, he played with a sense of completion, a feeling that his dedication had culminated in something tangible, something real. The following days were filled with messages and invitations. People he had never met reached out, wanting to hear more of his music or to invite him to participate in local events. He received letters from parents whose children were inspired to take up instruments, motivated by the beauty and emotion of his performance. Each message reinforced a simple but profound truth, that perseverance, passion, and dedication could finally be acknowledged, even after years of invisibility. Despite the sudden attention, he remained humble. He did not seek fame or accolades. What mattered most was the connection, the impact his music could have on others. He continued to practice daily, each session now infused with the memory of that transformative performance. The music had become more than a personal sanctuary. It was a bridge to the world, a medium through which he could communicate emotions that words could never capture. He also began to plan future performances. Local cafes, small theaters, and community centers became potential stages. The thought of performing for different audiences brought both excitement and a healthy tension, reminding him that growth often comes with challenges. Each opportunity to share his music became a step in a larger journey, one where he could refine his skills and continue to connect with people on a deeper level. As he moved through this new chapter, he noticed subtle changes in the way people treated him. Neighbors who had once ignored him now greeted him warmly, sometimes pausing to ask about his music. Colleagues at work seemed to view him differently, showing respect for his dedication and talent. Even casual acquaintances began to pay attention, drawn by the quiet, undeniable presence he had developed. Recognition, once elusive, was gradually becoming a natural part of his life. One afternoon, a young girl approached him after a small practice session at the local park. She held a tiny notebook with musical notes scrawled across the pages and shyly asked if he could teach her a few pieces. He smiled, remembering the childlike excitement he had once felt when first learning to play. Guiding her fingers on the keys, explaining the emotions behind each note, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. It was a reminder that his music had the power to inspire, to create joy, and to connect generations in a shared understanding of beauty and expression. Through these experiences, he began to understand the larger purpose of his talent. It was not only about personal satisfaction or recognition. It was about touching others, offering them a glimpse into the emotions that music could evoke. Each performance, each lesson, each interaction became part of a ripple effect, spreading appreciation, hope, and inspiration in ways he had never imagined. He reflected on the years of solitude, the times when no one noticed him, and the hours spent in quiet practice. Those moments, once tinged with loneliness and doubt, now felt like a necessary foundation. Without them, he would not have developed the depth, precision, and emotional richness that defined his playing. The invisible years had prepared him for the stage, teaching him patience, resilience, and the importance of unwavering dedication. Late at night, he sometimes played for no one at all, the soft melodies filling his apartment. These sessions were different now, infused with the knowledge that his music had touched hearts beyond the walls of his room. Even in solitude, he felt connected to a larger world, aware that the sound he created carried meaning, inspiration, and beauty. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a lifeline, a channel for expression, and a bridge to humanity. His journey had shifted from one of invisibility to recognition, but it was also a journey inward, a discovery of what it meant to persevere, to believe, and to trust in one's own abilities. The audience had validated his talent, but the true transformation was in his own perception. Understanding that his music mattered, that he mattered, and that the years of quiet practice had been a preparation for the moment when the world would finally see him. And so, he continued to play, each note a testament to resilience, each melody a story of hope, patience, and dedication. The applause had faded, but the impact remained, both on him and on the people who had listened. He had crossed the threshold from obscurity to recognition, from doubt to confidence, and from isolation to connection. His music, once hidden, was now a gift shared, an enduring reminder that perseverance and passion can ultimately overcome years of being unnoticed. The quiet musician had emerged into the light, and the world had listened, touched, and remembered. The weeks after the community event were filled with a new kind of energy. Invitations arrived from local schools, small theaters, and community centers, each asking him to perform, to share his music with a wider audience. At first, the flood of attention was overwhelming. He had spent so long in solitude that the sudden interest from so many people felt almost unreal. But beneath the excitement was a quiet determination to continue, to embrace this chance to connect with others through the music he loved. He carefully planned each performance, selecting pieces that would convey emotion and tell a story. Each composition was chosen with care, balancing technical skill with expressive depth. He wanted every note to matter, to reach beyond the surface and touch the hearts of those listening. As he practiced, he imagined the faces in the audience, the children inspired to dream, the adults reminded of beauty and emotion, and even the quiet observers who might never speak but would still feel the music resonate within them. His confidence grew with every performance. No longer was he the unnoticed musician in the background. He became a presence, someone whose talent and passion could captivate a room. The applause, the nods of appreciation, and the warm smiles of recognition were no longer unfamiliar. They were affirmations of the dedication he had poured into years of solitary practice. Each acknowledgement reinforced the value of persistence and belief in oneself. He also began to explore teaching. Children and teenagers approached him, eager to learn, fascinated by the piano and the stories it could tell. He discovered joy in guiding them, showing them how to express emotion through music, and helping them understand that talent was nurtured through patience and practice. The lessons became more than instruction. They were moments of connection, trust, and inspiration. Watching his students' eyes light up as they mastered a difficult passage reminded him of why he had devoted so much of his life to music. The impact extended beyond the classroom. Families who attended his performances often shared their gratitude, speaking of how the music had moved them, how it had brought calm or joy into their lives. People he had never met personally reached out through letters, messages, and conversations, sharing how his playing had inspired them to pursue their own passions or to find comfort in difficult times. It was a ripple effect, a quiet but profound way in which one person's dedication could influence many lives. Despite the growing recognition, he remained grounded. He continued to practice diligently, always striving to improve, to explore new compositions, and to refine his interpretation of familiar pieces. He understood that talent alone was not enough. It required effort, commitment, and the willingness to grow. Each performance was an opportunity to challenge himself, to deepen his connection to the music, and to communicate more effectively with his audience. He also reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The years of solitude, the moments of doubt, and the long hours of practice were no longer burdens. They were the foundation of his success. He realized that being overlooked in the past had taught him resilience, patience, and a profound understanding of the emotional power of music. The struggle had shaped him, making him not only a skilled pianist, but also someone who could appreciate the importance of every small step toward mastery. Community members began to recognize him in everyday life. Neighbors greeted him with respect, colleagues admired his dedication, and strangers offered smiles and words of encouragement. He was no longer invisible, but he also did not seek constant attention. What mattered was the meaningful connection he could create through his music, the moments when someone truly listened and felt something deeper because of it. The recognition he had longed for was not about fame, but about being heard and understood. He continued to perform at various events, each one reinforcing the bond between music and emotion. At a small local theater, he played to an audience that included families, students, and music enthusiasts. The room was intimate, allowing him to see the reactions on individual faces, to notice subtle gestures of appreciation, and to sense the energy that flowed between performer and listener. These moments were deeply fulfilling, affirming that music could bridge gaps, evoke feelings, and create memories. Over time, he expanded his reach, performing at festivals, cultural events, and community gatherings. He remained humble, always remembering the quiet apartment where it all began, the piano that had been his constant companion through years of obscurity. He understood that each performance was an opportunity not only to showcase skill but to touch lives, to inspire, and to share a part of himself that words alone could never convey. He also began mentoring young musicians, not just in technique but in understanding the emotional depth of music. He encouraged them to persevere, to find their own voice, and to embrace the discipline required to achieve their goals. Seeing their progress and passion gave him a renewed sense of purpose. It was a cycle of giving and receiving, where teaching and performing reinforced his connection to music and to the people around him. In quieter moments, he reflected on how far he had come. The invisible, unnoticed person he had once been had transformed into someone whose music resonated with many. He thought about the shy, uncertain musician who had spent countless hours practicing alone and smiled, grateful for the patience and dedication that had led to this point. The journey had been long and sometimes lonely, but it had been necessary, shaping not only his talent but his character. He also learned to embrace new challenges. Composing original pieces, collaborating with other musicians, and experimenting with different styles became part of his growth. He understood that mastery was not a final destination but an ongoing journey. Every new note, every new composition, every new performance was a step forward, a chance to deepen his craft and expand the emotional range of his music. Through it all, he remained humble, grounded by the memory of the years when no one paid attention to him. That experience gave him empathy for others who struggled in silence, and it inspired him to encourage and support those seeking to share their talents. His music became a language of understanding, compassion, and connection, reaching beyond technical skill to touch hearts and minds. As his reputation grew, he began to realize the broader impact of his journey. The story of a quiet, unnoticed musician who had persisted through doubt and solitude resonated with many. People saw in him an example of perseverance, patience, and the power of following one's passion. His performances became more than music. They were symbols of hope, reminders that dedication could overcome invisibility, and that talent, when nurtured, could reach the world. Eventually, he established a routine that balanced performance, teaching, and personal practice. Each day, he would play at the piano, exploring new compositions and refining existing ones. He would spend time mentoring students, guiding them in technique and expression. And he would perform at local events, connecting with audiences and sharing the emotional depth of his music. The rhythm of his life was fulfilling, rich with purpose, and grounded in the joy of creating and sharing music. He often reflected on the moment when his piano recital had first stunned the crowd. That day had been transformative, not only because it brought recognition but because it revealed to him the power of stepping forward despite fear. It was a lesson he carried into every subsequent performance, every interaction with students, and every new opportunity. Courage, he realized, was as essential as skill, and vulnerability could lead to profound connection. Through the years, his story inspired others quietly yet powerfully. People who had felt invisible or overlooked found encouragement in his journey. They saw that dedication, passion, and resilience could overcome years of obscurity, and that one could find their place in the world by sharing their true talents. His music, once a private solace, became a beacon, a source of inspiration, and a testament to the transformative power of persistence. And so, he continued, playing each note with intention, sharing each melody with care, and teaching each student with patience and heart. The quiet musician who had once been ignored now had a voice that resonated far beyond his own life, touching hearts, inspiring dreams, and leaving an enduring mark on his community. His journey was proof that perseverance, love for one's craft, and courage to step forward could change not only a life but the lives of many others. The music that once went unheard now echoed widely, carrying a message of hope, connection, and the beauty of never giving up on what truly matters.